Hey fellow cosmic hobbyists! With the crew of the Pathfinder discovering a rocky planet suitable for habitation, it only made sense to design a vessel that could haul serious cargo down to the surface. This ship started as a rough sketch, and if you use your imagination, you'll see cargo containers running along the top spine. I also decided there will be a pair of dropships that will be latched down up there. These will bring the cargo containers to the planet's surface itself. I'm also working on a visible cargo bay, because what's a freighter without a peek at what it's packing? I kicked things off with my usual wooden core. I figured if high-G aerobatic planes can be constructed out of wood, the core of this ship can too. This core is made from a pair of 1x2 pine strips, glued and clamped to keep things aligned while it cured. While that was setting up, I started cutting styrene strips to laminate over the core. This gives the rest of the structure something smooth and solid to lock onto. I bonded the styrene to the wood core with superglue. Once the glue sets, it's basically permanent. Short of a small detonation, you're not separating those layers without major damage to the plastic or the wood. Usually I design my mounting systems to attach from the bottom and the back, but since this ship has a glowing engine right where the rear mount would go, I went with a mount on the underside only. To make the mounting hole, I drilled a spot in the core for a threaded insert, filled it with 5-minute epoxy, and tapped it in place with a hammer. Once it sets, that insert isn't going anywhere. This will make a nice core structure to build the rest of the ship from. Once the main wooden core was finished, I moved on to the outer structure. This is where my go-to material, styrene, really shines. I used 40,000 sheet for added rigidity, which is perfect when you're trying to make a model that looks like it could actually survive re-entry. I measured and cut the large bottom panel, centered the wood core on it, and glued it in place with both superglue and my favorite Weld-On 3 solvent. And after that, I added styrene ribs along the core's length. Now, despite my best efforts to keep things perfectly centered, the core was just slightly off, so I had to measure and cut each rib individually. Each rib also got a hole through it to run wires for lighting. Trust me, it's way easier to do this now than curse your past self later. Next up was framing out the section that holds the cargo bay insert. This part's mostly made of styrene strips plus a central column that houses the mounting hole, and it adds a nice bit of structural strength. Once that was together, I created a recessed bottom section where the printed cargo bay slides in and locks into place. You'll spot my 1, 2, 3 blocks in use here too. They're great for getting square, clean joints. These are a great addition to your bench, and I'll put a link down below if you want to try getting some for yourself. Since I planned on lighting the cargo bay, I cut openings in the ceiling and built troughs for the LED strips. I went with bright white LEDs because the crew needs task lighting, not some moody nightclub ambiance. To keep the light from leaking where it shouldn't, I lined the interior with aluminum foil tape. It's lightweight, it's easy to work with, it's highly reflective, and it's great because it doesn't let any light through, so it really cuts down those light leaks. You can find this tape in most home stores, but I got mine on Amazon. Once the tape and light troughs were in, I gave everything a coat of gray so it would blend well when viewed through the open bay door. But before things got too far along, I soldered on the LED leads and tested the lights, and thankfully they worked, and then I installed them. The crew should have no trouble finding their lunch in here. With the main body squared away, I moved on to the front bridge section. It's a pretty sizable chunk of the ship, built from, you guessed it, more styrene. I love using this stuff. It's forgiving, easy to cut, and if you mess up, you can easily sand it back into submission. To get the piece you want, you just measure, score, and snap it. You might need to clean up the edge a bit with sandpaper, but it's no biggie. Design-wise, I made the bridge section tall enough to shield the cargo containers riding piggyback on the top of the ship. And it'll also double as an internal cargo space and crew quarters. I also drilled wiring holes in the back of this section to prep for bridge lighting. In shipbuilding and model making, you can never have too many wire pathways. It's like adding cup holders. More is always better. One thing I knew from the start, this cargo ship needed a lit-up bay you could actually peer into. Because let's face it, what's the point of building all that detail if no one can see it? I used Tinkercad to do some 3D kit bashing and cobbled together a cargo hold full of boxes, tanks, containers, and yes, even a tiny forklift, because no futuristic freight bay is complete without the tiniest OSHA-compliant forklift imaginable. The bay was a bit too large for my 3D printer's build plate, so I split it into 4 equal parts and glued them onto a piece of styrene. After assembly, everything got a coat of gray primer, and I started the painting process. I went with high-vis orange for the pallet racks, partly for realism, and partly so it feels like you're walking into a Home Depot orbiting Saturn. The boxes got a variety of colors, and the large tanks near the bay door were painted blue. I imagine these would be used for storing drinking water on the new planet. So color coding just made sense, intergalactic health code and all. Technically, the cargo bay actually spans the full area beneath the top mounted containers, but I only modeled and lit about half of it. It saved me a lot of time and wiring to do it this way. The ship won't get too far without engines, so just like my earlier dry dock build, I went with the tried and true Jupiter-class ion engines. These are the standard engines CQH Aerospace developed, and by developed, I mean they built them in Tinkercad and 3D printed them at the proper scale. Each engine has a hole in the base to route wires for LED lighting. Because of course, like all respectable sci-fi engines, they're going to glow blue. I used 3-volt micro LEDs and small pieces of styrene which were hot glued into place on the back of the inside of the engine. Now the engines mount to a base I built earlier in the ship's construction. This base also houses the warp exhaust, and it's got a nice sandwich-style design, perfect for tucking in a few greeblies. And speaking of greeblies, it's time to go digging. I cracked open the parts bin and pulled out bits from old ship kits, tanks, planes, all kinds of other things I had in there. With those pieces in place, it was time to pick a color for the warp exhaust LEDs. With the LED strips I used inside this, I had the option to pick many different colors just by sending different voltages to each of the LEDs, but I ended up going with red to contrast the blue of the ion engines. Now for the wiring, I used 3-volt blue LEDs for the ion engines, which were different from the 5-volt LED strip lights I'm using elsewhere in the ship. And since the whole ship is powered by a 5-volt USB-C input, I needed to solder resistors to each of the blue LEDs so they don't fry themselves like popcorn in a microwave. I used my new soldering station setup for the connections, and shrink tubing to keep everything nice and neat. Once wired up, the lights worked perfectly. That's always a small miracle. At this point, I reached a real milestone moment. I was able to finally permanently glue in the cargo bay into the main core section. And for that, I spread around super glue, pressed it into place, and wait for it to cure. Then I glued the top and bottom sections together. And after that, I put the front and rear sections on the ship. Once those were in place, you could really see it taking shape. With the ship starting to look whole, I moved on to the cargo spine, which is the central backbone that separates and supports the cargo container stacks, built of course from trusty styrene. I also 3D printed some standard cargo containers which I found in Tinkercad to use as spacers while assembling. This ship can hold 54 of the 40-foot containers, plus there's 2 smaller pockets for specialty cargo. Right now I plan for some empty tanks that will go in those spaces, which are essential for the new colony. They can put oxygen or other gases in there that they need. There are also 2 docking spots for the dropships. The crew gave them the name of leapfrogs, since they bounce around doing all their cargo drops. Before I got too far along with the rest of the build, I turned my attention to the bridge that would control and fly this big beast. With that in mind, I did some more Tinkercad digital kit bashing and laid out a 2-tier setup with the navigators down front and the captain up top, overseeing operations like a space-age air traffic controller. And standing next to the captain is Lily, our old border collie, immortalized as the bridge's moral support officer. She's probably the only one keeping the crew from ejecting each other out of the airlock during long hauls. For extra morale, I also added a Dr. Pepper vending machine in the back of the bridge. Sure, the ship might be a bit short on creature comforts, but at least someone had the foresight to sign for the machine when it was accidentally delivered to the loading dock. I like to think there's a luxury cruiser somewhere out there missing its soda supply, with its crew wondering where their beverages went. I printed this bridge on my Anycubic Photon resin printer, primed it, and hand-painted the whole thing. Being N-scale, the crew figures are tiny, so I didn't get carried away. I added just enough detail to make it clear who's who. For the vending machine, I printed a few Dr. Pepper vending machine fronts on paper, cut one out, and glued it on with Aleene's tacky glue. After the bridge was painted, I set it aside and finished the roof structure which would house the lights for it. I built this out of more styrene and lined this with the same aluminum foil tape as earlier to prevent light leaks. I used some warm white 3-volt micro LEDs with the resistors on each of them, and then I superglued them all into place. After that, I stuck the bridge in place and tested the lights to see how it looked. It looks pretty darn cool so far. Now that the bridge is painted and the rest of the ship is coming together, I started adding greeblies and other detail around the hull. And while you watch some of this detail work go down, I just want to take a moment to thank my Patreon members. Your support is what keeps CQH Aerospace stocked with paint, LEDs, and enough styrene to tile the Death Star. And Patreon members also get sneak peeks of my builds in real time, and honestly, you make this whole project possible. Seriously, thank you. Now you might be wondering, how did this ship come to be? Well, here's the backstory I imagined. When the crew of the Pathfinder research vessel landed on a rocky, uncharted planet, they stumbled onto something big. Not only did they discover a brand new metallic ore, which they dubbed unobtainium, but they also found the bacteria responsible for producing dimethyl sulfide, the same compound detected by the orbital telescope back on Earth. Naturally, the Space Consortium jumped at the opportunity. They decided to establish a permanent colony there. But building a colony from scratch in deep space? That's no weekend camping trip. It would need massive amounts of material, equipment, and logistics. So they called in CQH Aerospace to design a heavy-lift cargo vessel. The result was a tough, modular workhorse built to carry everything from prefab shelters to water tanks, and maybe a crate of snacks if there's room. This ship features a central spine where modified cargo modules can attach externally, plus a large internal bay for sensitive payloads. Since CQH couldn't build everything in-house, they partnered with other aerospace companies to help manufacture the more complex components. The propulsion system? It's a basic warp drive, not as fast as the Pathfinder's, but that's by design. This ship prioritizes cargo over speed. The Pathfinder might reach Proxima Centauri in a week. This ship takes a month, but it gets there, and it gets the job done. We named the first ship in this class the USS Astraeus, after the Greek titan of stars and celestial navigation. Seemed fitting for a ship transporting goods for future worlds. And while the Astraeus might seem small compared to today's ocean freighters, keep in mind, they don't have to travel through warp space. But future generations of ships will likely be even bigger, better, and bolder. With cargo ships like this, colonization of deep space is no longer a fantasy. It's a matter of logistics. After seeing the rest of the construction get completed, it's now time to throw a coat of primer on the beast. I took it outside of prime with basic Rust-Oleum flat gray primer and managed to get some footage of the process, even though being nighttime made it a bit more difficult. Now all the important parts are primed and ready for the finishing process. While the primer on the big ship was drying, I airbrushed Vallejo white on the dropships and the cargo containers to get them ready for more color. After those were painted, the gray primer was pretty much dry on the main ship, so I put some Vallejo black into my airbrush and sprayed all the panel lines and nooks and crannies. This will add some visual depth to the ship once the ultra-thin coat of sky gray was painted over everything. With the black lines drying, I masked off individual containers in the cargo container stack to make them different colors. I used Vallejo paints in various colors like brown, tan, dark red, and dark blue. The white containers will end up being CQH Aerospace branded. They look pretty cool when painted, but they would definitely get pretty grungy due to being brought back and forth to the dusty and harsh planet surface. After those were all painted, I mixed up an ultra-thin coat of sky gray paint and airbrushed some very thin coats of it over the ship, making sure not to completely obscure the black paint. The overall effect I was after turned out pretty well. Once this was all dry, I taped off the engines and sprayed them with Vallejo jet exhaust color. This is one of my favorite colors for engines like that. I also sprayed the front windscreens and crew quarters windows Vallejo copper. With the engines painted and before spraying the gloss clear coat, I worked on detail painting, which includes painting the tanks, which Nettie got involved with, and also painting the various pipes in oily steel color. The larger high-pressure lines also got a coat of flat green. Nettie and I also painted the cargo container latching mechanisms a yellow color to make them stand out more. This was also a good time to paint the leapfrog landing pads. I masked them off and started with a base color of dark steel. I then used a set of paint masks I made on my Cameo silhouette cutter to make the border lines and pad number identifiers. In retrospect, the identifier numbers weren't necessary, as they are hidden by the dropships once they are glued in place. Once everything was dry, I mixed up some gloss clear and sprayed it over the cargo containers, dropships, and the big ship itself. This gloss is good for hiding the carrier film from decals I'll be applying next. With a gloss coat on, I started to apply the decals, which I made most of them in Photoshop and printed on a water slide laser decal paper. I also got a little help from ChatGPT to make one of the logos for the tan cargo containers. These containers are for a company called Two Dudes in a Spaceship Moving Company. I figured if colonists would need to move their stuff to a new planet, they would need a moving company to help them. The rest of the decals are just your typical ship decals, like the ship's name and designation, which is LDC-01. The LDC stands for Logistics Delivery Craft. This ship also got a set of paw prints that are scanned from our old dog Lily to commemorate her memory. After the decals were all on, I sprayed a bit more gloss clear on them to seal them in, then started the weathering. I started with stippling oily steel on the corners and other highway areas. I figured this ship and the outer cargo would make frequent descents to the planet's surface, which is extremely dusty and dirty, so the ship would likely be just as grungy to match. After the oily steel color dried, I mixed up a dark red color that matches the dust and grime that would be encountered on the planet. I stippled this on in spots over the oily steel. This process was also done for the cargo containers and a tiny bit for the dropships. Once this was all in place, I sprayed more clear coat to seal it all. A grunge wash was made with burnt sienna, oil paint, and odorless mineral spirits, and brushed into all the panel lines and recessed areas, with the mineral spirits being allowed to evaporate from the surface. A bummer part of the story is that once everything was dry, Nettie and I looked at the ship and realized the weathering was way overdone. To remedy this, I stippled on some sky gray to cut back a lot of the oily steel and red. The effect ended up working well, and of course, like a real newbie, I don't have the footage of this part since I forgot to hit record on my camera. But a happy part of the story is that while we usually put a small wooden heart in each build, I couldn't find where I had put them. But in the process of looking for them, I found a heart-shaped Cheerio hiding in the corner. These were some of our dog Lily's favorite treats, so I decided to use this instead. I sealed it with a generous clear coat, and Nettie glued it in place. With all the cargo containers, drop ships, and Cheerios in place, I hit it with a generous coat of matte clear, let it dry, and called this build complete. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when I release new videos.